questions for you. Your hope after someone listens to our conversation or reads your book. And I think that the clear example of this is just opening the door for us to have a conversation on what we want and what are we looking for, rather than always trying to make inferences, which almost always seem to backlash. At least for us in the modern world, we've seen how the Me Too movement emerged because people inferred, men inferred, that women wanted something in the workplace, or
Right.
there wasn't this conversation, there wasn't this, we would always just go ahead and do things that were inappropriate. But going into the future, David, what are your hopes in terms of this battle between the sexes? How can we overcome our blind spots?
Yeah, well, I think, as I said, I think education about the evolved sex differences is really the first step. Um, and that's a large step. There are a couple of ways in which we can do this. So one is there are some studies that have people imagine, let's say if you're a male, what if these things happen to your sister or to your mother or to your partner, your girlfriend or your wife or your close female friend? Like, so if in the workplace, your girlfriend or your sister, if a guy is touching her, unwanted sexual touching, what would happen? And people, when it happens to someone they care about, all of a sudden they have a deeper empathy and understanding for this. And so I think, and I think we can leverage, and that's another feature of our evolved psychology,
Yeah.
is that we care deeply about all these alliances. And that's why, just to make a more meta point, it's not men as a group in opposition to women as a group. It's individual men who are in some instances in conflict with individual women, but also in alliance with and in cooperative alliance with some other women, like their sisters, mothers, girlfriends, and so forth. So I think that we can kind of exploit or leverage our evolved sexual psychology around relationships to make that transition to helping people understand better the underlying psychology of the other sex. But another one, here's another one that I talk about in the book. It has to do with the laws and policies around things like sexual harassment. So I think that, and I'll make kind of another meta comment here, most sexual harassment is committed by a small subset of males. Yeah. So it's not all men who do it. And I think most men would find it morally abhorrent to commit acts of sexual harassment in the workplace, but a subset of men do. And in the book, I identify what that subset is. It's men who are high on narcissism, Machiavellianism, and psychopathy. They lack empathy, combined with a short-term mating strategy. And so what you have is these are dark triad men who pursue a short-term mating strategy that commit the vast majority of acts of sexual harassment and sexual coercion as well, including rape. And so it's not all men. So we have to get away from thinking all men and all women. It's a subset of men and also a subset of women. But in terms of policies and laws, say around sexual harassment, just to take that example, the laws and policies are written in gender neutral ways. They're written in ways that the way that it's typically framed is, would a reasonable person view this pattern of conduct as sexually harassing? Now, the laudable reason for why it's presented in a gender neutral way is we want the laws to apply equally to everyone. Okay, however, we know empirically that most of the victims of sexual harassment are women, and the overwhelming majority of perpetrators are men. Yeah. And we know that reasonable women differ from reasonable men in the ways that I just mentioned a couple minutes ago. That is, a reasonable woman views that same pattern as harassing, whereas a reasonable man might not. So should the laws and policies be written according to a generic reasonable person standard, or should we have a reasonable woman standard versus a reasonable man standard, or split the difference, or whatever? or even when it comes to who's the judge, what is the sex of the judge? What is the sex composition of the jury that's adjudicating these cases? Well, if it's majority of reasonable men, you're going to come up with different verdicts than a majority of reasonable women would. And so I think that these scientifically established evolved sex differences in our sexual psychology have implications for how we design policies and laws around things like sexual harassment and also stalking and and also sexual coercion or rape. And so, but I think that it all boils down to a foundation of scientific understanding of what are these differences, sex differences in our sexual psychology, and then how do we deal with them? How do we educate people about them? And then how do we reflect them in our laws and policies?
Wow, that's amazing. And it really made me think on everything that you said on the jury can make a huge influence in the sex of the jury can make a huge influence in a verdict, and those things we, at least I don't prize in our current social landscape. And I hope in the future, after reading your work, really creates a more fruitful environment for both sexes, so we can all enjoy our time here rather than be on a battle, so to say.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's the battle hurts both men and women. So like in the case of sexual harassment, as I said, it's a subset, a small subset of men who commit or who are serial harassers in the workplace. And this harms the men who are not, because among other things, people say, well, men get blanketly targeted. They say, it's men who are sexual harassers. Well, that's true. Majority of sexual harassers are men, but most men are not, and so that this causes conflict in the workplace where men become, given the current environment, men, for example, have pulled back from mentoring junior women in the workplace for fear of being accused of sexual harassment.
Wow.
And then that harms women because that deprives women of access to mentors who can teach them about, their profession and so forth. Yeah. And so these conflicts hurt both men and women in the workplace. And so again, understanding our deep evolved sexual psychology is critical to reducing these conflicts.
Absolutely. And I'm becoming aware of our time. I just wanted to share with you that aside of influencing the workplace, in my former college, we were witnessing the Me Too movement emerge tremendously.
Yeah.
And I had a good group of friends that I esteem and I see as people with integrity, being loyal, being good people.
Yeah.
All around. And I wrote an article. I had never published it because of fears of getting canceled. The times were very, very tumultuous in our college. But I would ask a lot of people in the parks around the college, the public spaces. I would ask them, has this movement influenced the way you approach women? Mostly men, because as you say, most sexual harassment cases happen from men to women. And a lot of people who never would, at least for me, in my perspective, of course I have blind sides, I don't know the true intentions of people, but they would say, I don't even want to approach women at my college because of fearing that something that I said would be misinterpreted. And there was this huge, it's ongoing. There's a huge wall of shame for people who had, and also professors, like saying how they sexually assault someone. And some of the cases include just the teacher only hires women. The teacher hires research assistants who are women, and that's sexist. So those kinds of things have been happening in college campuses as well.
Yeah. I think, and these battles, the kind of political and ideological battles are getting played out, I would say, on college campuses and universities throughout the world, maybe even in ways more intensely than in other places. Perhaps because people are aware of these issues, they're on social media a lot, and we are influenced by, I mean, this is another feature of our evolved psychology. We are a very social species, and so we're evolved to be very concerned about our reputation, or the esteem in which we are held by other people in the group. And so if the standards shift, and these guys don't want to damage their reputation, or their status in the eyes of their peer group by doing certain things. But yeah, it's some have argued that that the Me Too movement has gone too far, and had a chilling effect. But I think that it's also brought real problems to people's attention. So what I think is, we need to have emotions calm down about these issues and look at the science. The science has to guide it rather than our emotions around it.
Absolutely, and this is also an aftermath of this. This is a new field, right? The workplace, men and women working together. It's just happening. It's new
Right. It's evolution.
Exactly.
Yeah.
In terms of evolutionary our blueprint, we aren't used to this. So hopefully, this rocky environment that we live in, and I believe it will just shape a much better and responsible and fruitful social landscape for both men and women.
Yes, absolutely, and that's my hope, and I think it will.
Yeah.
It may take some time to work these things out, because there's some resistance to even recognizing that men and women have a fundamentally different sexual psychology. For example, people don't like the idea of evolved sex differences, in part for some legitimate reason. People worry about there will be discrimination against women if we somehow acknowledge that there are evolved sex differences. But here we're not talking about sex differences in ability. We're talking about sex differences in our sexual psychology and our preferences. And so it doesn't have any consequences for discrimination in the workplace. But you're absolutely right. So this is an example of a mismatch, where ancestrally men tended to hunt and go to war in same-sex groups. Women tended to gather, do child rearing in same-sex groups. And so in the modern workplace, they're sexually integrated. We have men and women interacting with each other, and our mating mechanisms get activated, and our sexual psychology gets activated in ways in which it is now inappropriate. And so, but nonetheless, we also can't forbid people from having relationships. People are attracted to people who have similar interests, and it's very common, like say in academia, many people get together for people in their own department at their own university and so forth, because they share similar interests, similar values. So, how it will all shake out, I'm optimistic that it will shake out well, but it's going to take some time, and also a trimming back of the emotions and hysteria around these issues, to take a recognition of the science of our sexual psychology and what those implications are for the workplace.